Okay, well, I think we're 11 minutes past now, so we can make a start. But I think there are others that are still joining, but that's okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to the Research Culture and Practice Forum session. We're going to use this final session of the day to take a forward look at developments in the research culture space and what it could mean for Concordat initiative owners, institutions, researchers, and other key stakeholders in the sector. As an introduction, I'm Dan Wake, a policy manager at Universities UK. I also chair the Research Integrity Concordat Signatories Group as well, and I work with Tom Rowe on the Research Development Concordat as well. And I'd like to give a huge thanks to Tom on that note for his work in organising this forum. Great set of topics, fantastic speakers as well, and a great attendance. So thanks to all of you too. And of course, this is only the end of day one on this as well. I'm delighted to be joined by Rachel Cox as well, Head of Membership and Engagement at VTI, and also Hayley Moulding, the Senior Research Manager at the Higher Education Funding Council for Wales. Thanks very much for joining us. Please use the Q&A function throughout. Please, ask your questions to us. Please make sure to use the Q&A function to ask questions rather than the chat, because I don't think they're always seen. Instead, you can though use the chat to add your own views and insights and suggestions with those that are on the call today. This webinar is being recorded as well and will be uploaded to the UK Events YouTube page as well, and I think you'll get an email about that once it's available to view. We've had some really fantastic discussions throughout the day covering all sorts of topics and the concordats and initiatives in the landscape as well. We've also heard some examples of how universities are implementing these concordats and initiatives and their benefits. So, for example, this morning we had some interesting remarks about how they can be used as catalysts for discussion, tools for persuasion as well, but ultimately sort of improving governance processes and providing assurances and support for the community. And also, interestingly, this morning there was a proposition that organisations, how organisations choose to use the concordats can have more impact than the concordat requirements themselves. And bureaucracy and alignment also came through this morning. And I think it's fair to say that some of those themes came through in the concordats and agreements review, which I'll summarise shortly. As I say, we thought we'd end the day on a future-facing discussion to think about how we can really keep that momentum going in terms of ensuring concordats and initiatives and wider initiatives and research culture are effective amidst the continuously changing landscape. So while we're going through our own remarks, please do start sending in your questions in the Q&A chat. I'll now attempt to share my screen. Please bear with me a second. I hope you can all see that okay. Fingers crossed that worked. Great, excellent. So yes, I'm going to take us through the concordats and agreements review. Thanks for all the thumbs up. What I'm going to cover is a bit of an introduction and background as to why we, by we I mean UKRI, Welcome and the UK, commissioned the work. The research was in two phases, so I'll go through phase one first, which is kind of taking a broader look at the landscape, and the phase two, which is using that landscape review to kind of take a look and see what actions we might implement off the back of those findings, and then we'll have a chat about next steps as well after that. So in terms of the background behind this, I think as we've been talking about today, there's been lots and lots of initiatives, really important initiatives in the landscape to think about how we improve the culture and environment of research activity. They've all developed for lots of different reasons in response to different challenges, different opportunities. They cover all sorts of issues as well, from integrity, knowledge exchange, supporting technicians, open research, all these different kinds of things, and all been really, really helpful for the community. They have very different ways in terms of how they engage with the community, in terms of their oversight, and how long they've been in existence for. It's a very small diagram on this slide, but you can see I'm going back as far as 2005 all the way to sort of 2020. Have very different scope and focus as well. The ways in which they monitor take up, it kind of varies as well, as does the requirements of those different initiatives as well. Some require action plans, some are more of a lighter touch. And until the point at which we did this, or commissioned this research, I should say, there hadn't been a check of how they all kind of worked collectively in terms of their impact on research culture and environment in the UK, and indeed whether there are actually any gaps, whether there's other areas that we should be looking at that weren't captured by these different initiatives. This is really an opportunity that we felt to take a look at all these different initiatives and their effects and how they all interact with each other, and think about how we can really drive those forward. It also draws on a couple of important reviews that were commissioned independently by the government. The first of which, of course, you all know, we've been talking about it a lot today, is the government's people and culture strategy, which actually asks for a review of existing concordats and accreditations to making sure they sort of continue to drive positive change, also minimising bureaucracy. And on that point on bureaucracy, there was a mention in there as well about how concordats within higher education could be streamlined and made less burdensome. So there were those two strategies kind of in reviews in the background. We wanted to make sure that the work that we did lined up with those. I mentioned the commissioning partners. I think it was important that we commission the work rather than do it ourselves. I think one of the key reasons for that is that, just speaking from Universities UK perspective, we work very closely on a number of initiatives, or most of the initiatives, but we're also secretariat for a few of them as well. So I think it would have looked a bit out of place if we were commissioning a review of the concordats that we work very closely with. So we kind of decided to do this on a very independent basis, and we did that with Wellcome and UKRI. So there was a phase one, and I'll go through the phase one and how we went about that. So as I say, that was to take a look at the insights on the effects of these initiatives and how they interact. That was the first phase of work. It wasn't designed to measure the impact of individual initiatives. It was meant to kind of take a look at all of them together and think about how collectively they help improve research culture and environment across the UK. And we commissioned Basis Social to undertake the phase one work, and I very much like to thank them for producing a really helpful report and outputs for this piece of research. I should say as well, we did this between July and September 2021. It's important to note that, because obviously since that point in time, the concordats initiative, some of them have developed even further. So there's very much a snapshot at this point in time, so let's recognise that. We had all sorts of engagements in this process. We had our own external challenge group. Obviously, senior leaders from our own commissioning teams were involved in this as well. Also engaged with the initiative owners, institutions themselves, and also the review of bureaucracy team wanted to make sure it was aligned with that review. We published it in March 2022. To say we think it's the first ever snapshot of this initiative landscape as of the summer 2021. I say it doesn't draw conclusions or recommendations. That was kind of part of the purpose of the phase two piece of work. We wanted to take a look at that first. In terms of the phase one findings, certainly net positive impact, really important to say from the initiatives in terms of their impact on research culture and working environment, and that certainly outweighed the administrative burden. I've got a list of some of the perceived benefits that came through from the work, but actually quite a few of these I think were picked up in today's discussions, which is helpful to see. One is focusing the attention on the senior leadership level of the importance of this space and the importance of research culture. One is how it can inform organisational strategy as well, and policies to make sure we're thinking about high quality research in the context of wider organisational strategy. It can help think about the ways that we can share good practice and share learning in this space. It can also help to share, break down silos across the landscape and encourage collaborations over similar issues, and also providing a mandate for action as well on these issues too. Again, some of the things that came through from phase one that I think have been reflected on a bit today. One is the kind of evidencing the direct impact of the initiatives on research culture and the challenges of that. And the reason for that, I think, that came through is because they're kind of embedded in organisations in very different ways. It's difficult to come up with a consistent mechanism for measuring the ways in which there's the kind of the direct impact of these initiatives. There's a net positive benefit for sure, but it's difficult to kind of work that out, considering they're all implemented in very different ways. Another really important thing that came through is that there was no obvious overlap between the aims, but then as a whole, they can create administrative burden. And also it makes it difficult to track initiative in institutional progress as well. It can be administratively challenging to do that, well, given all the requirements that are involved. So there's a really strong call, I think, from both initiative owners and implementers of these concordats initiatives to think about those potential alignments to help reduce that burden and coordinate things a bit more effectively. So we then moved on to phase 2. This is actually part of phase 1, but it helped us set the scene for phase 2. So these are kind of all in a nutshell what these different concordats initiatives were trying to achieve. And it doesn't really do it justice over one slide, but I kind of did our best. But it's broadly around research conduct and working practices, staff development as well, assessment and evaluation, and then equality, diversity, and inclusion. And collectively, they help support research culture. We had this as a bit of a baseline for the phase 2 piece of work. So the purpose of phase 2 was to bring everyone together again, so initiative owners in the community, to look at those alignments that were kind of suggested as part of the phase 1 piece of work and increase the influence and capacity across the landscape. I think it's really important as well, that second point, this isn't all just about bureaucracy, it's maximising the effectiveness of these initiatives as well. It started in July 22, it was published in May this year. Hopefully some of you have seen the report, but I encourage you to read that when you do have a chance. We also commissioned an external organisation for that as well, Auxentia, undertook that work. Again, we'd really like to thank them for all the great work that they put into that as well, and the great final report. And the key thing is that the outputs were and will continue to be developed and co-owned by the community. This isn't a UKRI welcome review. This is very much a community driven review. This is the approach that Auxentia took towards the methodology, the double diamond approach. Essentially what it involved is doing a bit of background research, interviews with initiative owners to kind of unpack some of the challenges a little bit more, speaking with users of these initiatives to think about, come up with some proposed solutions, then working again with the initiative owners to sort of test those solutions, proposed solutions, and how they might work in practice. And then finally coming together as both initiative owners and users to kind of refine that and then plan, some helpful next steps. In terms of key findings there, again, strong appetite for change came through from the initiative owners. There was a little bit of concern about whether the impact of individual concordats would be diluted should we move to kind of a more streamlined approach. There's also strong recognition as well that the initiatives are quite diverse in their purposes and their scope, very much sit in a complex landscape. And then in terms of the engagement with the users and then part 2 of the initiative owners as well, really strong ambition to improve research culture and environment, moving to a more culture-centric model rather than a concordat-centric model. Definitely scope for greater alignment. I think there's some things we'll have to work through in practice in terms of the detail and making sure that we're not adding too much additional bureaucracy in the move to reduce bureaucracy, but we'll have to work that through. It seems important to define what we mean by good research culture as well, and I think that's something that we have to unpack a little bit more, and indeed that's one of the actions that came through, is coming up with a kind of more consistent approach to how we define research culture. And then it's also important to think about how the concordats initiatives work with other instruments in the landscape. Obviously, we've got the Future Research Assessment Programme, which is in the works at the moment. We might sort of see progress of that quite soon. It'd be worth thinking about how it aligns with that and other reporting mechanisms as well. So in terms of key outcomes, coming up with a set of shared principles to define the characteristics of a positive environment for research culture, working to those values and then having measurable indicators of progress, simplifying the bureaucracy. Again, an important point was made that not all bureaucracy is undesirable. It's important, it can provide accountability and provide helpful intelligence. It's just make sure we do that in a proportionate way. I mentioned moving from a concordat-centric model to a culture-centric model. And then it came up with an action plan specifically for how we can deliver some of this and how it will be co-owned and co-delivered by initiative owners, and also how higher education institutions and research organisations can be involved in that process too. There's definitely further work as well that needs to be done to understand the data and the reporting requirements, the different initiatives, look at where there are overlaps, where there aren't, thinking about where we can maybe streamline some of those. And as I mentioned, already aligning with other instruments in the research ecosystem, but also where data has been collected already by the likes of JISC and HESA and others, again, thinking about where we can improve our alignment with that too. So in summary, this is what the research intended to do, to try and look at those alignments. It built on kind of the first ever mapping of the initiatives and to think about how we can improve efficiency in this space. Hopefully it's a really important step forward for us all in terms of how we can collaborate around this and make sure we're working around a shared definition around culture and making sure that the initiatives we develop support those goals. Again, really important that we do this collectively, really need your support in helping us drive this forward, and really important that we continue the momentum in this space as well. The report's published, we need to make sure that we take actions quickly, and we're doing our best to try and convene the initiative owners as soon as we can at an appropriate point to really talk about how we might work some of this through. I will stop sharing my slides now. Great. Right, I think that's it from me for now. I'm now going to hand over to Rachel, who's going to discuss the idea behind a shared research culture framework and the values and principles that underpin that. So hopefully feeding in very nicely into the research I just mentioned. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks. Can I just check you can see my screen?
Yes, all great. Thank you.
Great. Okay. So I'm Rachel Cox. I'm the Head of Membership and Engagement for VTI, and I was previously the Engagement and Policy Manager. In that role, I was involved in the consultation for the Concordat to support the career development of researchers and the subsequent drafting of the now 4-year-old Research Development Concordat. VTI is the global leader in supporting the professional development of researchers, experienced in working with institutions as they strive for research excellence, innovation and impact. We are a non-profit programme, part of the Careers Research and Advisory Centre, CRAC, which has over 50 years' experience in enhancing the skills and careers of researchers. Our aims cover 3 areas: informing strategy and policy, advocating for effective evidence-based policy and environments through research and intelligence, evaluating impact and leading change; enhancing provision, creating and recognising excellent provision through knowledge exchange, collaborative networks and co-development; promoting good practice and translating knowledge into innovative practical outputs; and enabling individuals, engaging individuals in their career development through the recognition of their professional competence and promoting access to opportunities that nurture talent. Our strategy to VTI 2025 has identified 3 areas of focus: redefining what makes a successful researcher, championing a healthy research environment, and promoting the value of researchers. So focusing on some of our activities, this will help to demonstrate our interests in the research culture space. Firstly, the well-established VTI Researcher Development Framework, embedded across universities and research institutes within the UK as well as internationally, sets out the wide-ranging knowledge, intellectual abilities, techniques, and professional standards expected to do research, as well as the personal qualities, knowledge, and skills to work with others and ensure the wider impact of research. And in light of the focus on research culture, the VTI RDF will be undergoing some revision, with more to be shared in September at our International Research Development Conference. The HR Excellence in Research Award is a European Commission award managed by VTI in the UK, which recognises institutional commitment to improving working conditions and career development opportunities for researchers. It acts as a peer-reviewed accountability process for institutions to drive forward strategic improvement as mapped to the principles of the Researcher Development Concordat. Providing measures and evidence for the Researcher Development Concordat and the HR Excellence in Research Award is CEDARS, the Culture, Employment and Development in Academic Research Survey, a biennial national benchmarking survey with questions mapped to concordats, incorporating the environment, culture, professional development and employment of research staff and the experiences of their managers. Since its launch in 2020, the valuable data has supported the sector in demonstrating areas of success and highlighting areas for improvement in terms of research culture. This year has seen over 60 institutions take part in the national benchmarking, with responses from 8,500 researchers. VTI's mission is to help create the conditions within which researchers can thrive. We do this by focusing on how researchers are supported. Research culture should be positive, healthy, inclusive, open, and collaborative. For VTI, a positive research culture is one where there is a culture of learning and where researchers are supported to engage in a wide range of professional and career development opportunities. We want to understand how all of the existing concordats and initiatives can be best leveraged to ensure that individuals remain at the heart of research culture initiatives. Now I will come on to talk about the UKRI State of the Nation on Research Culture. UK Research and Innovation has commissioned CRAC, Shift Learning and the UK Reproducibility Network to conduct a comprehensive review of research culture as part of their efforts to enhance their research and innovation ecosystem. This project aims to provide a knowledge base to support UKRI's work, contributing to the development of the good practice exchange outlined in the government's People and Culture Strategy. UKRI's overarching goal is to establish a world-class R&I system by collaborating with stakeholders across the sector to cultivate researchers and their careers, foster innovative ideas and environments, and maximise research impact. The People and Culture Strategy, initiated by the UK government, serves as a call for collective efforts to enhance research culture. The proposed good practice exchange aims to harness and consolidate ongoing activities in the sector for the benefit of researchers, research itself, and society as a whole. The exchange is intended to use existing momentum and foster collective action to improve research culture. The core aim of this project was to map and better understand current and past activities to improve the UK culture and environment across the R&I sector. Core to this, obtaining input from a diverse range of stakeholders, including those from underrepresented groups. Insights will be published following the completion. And we use the definition of culture developed by the Royal Society. Research culture encompasses the behaviours, values, and expectations and attitudes and norms of our research communities. While the research and innovation ecosystems are interlinked in many areas, the culture and innovation will be out of scope. By initiatives, we are referring to specific plans or actions intended to change the behaviours, values, expectations, attitudes, and/or norms of the research and innovation workforce. We've taken a collaborative and inclusive approach to meeting the project objectives and have designed the rigorous process shown in part here. Phases A and B have been completed, and we are partway through Phase C. The workshops in Phase C have been designed to gain a variety of perspectives from people across the research spectrum, and participants are selected to involve underrepresented communities and diverse opinions. This is done through oversampling, as well as listening to advice from people from those communities on who to contact. The research team have postgraduate experience employing user-led and action research, the principles of which are used in this design to ensure the workshops are co-produced rather than top-down. In the next phases, there will be analysis, followed by results and conclusions. Our report will be submitted to UKRI towards the end of August, and there is the expectation that UKRI will publish something further on in the autumn. The Good Practice Exchange is an opportunity to think about how best to build on previous and existing initiatives and set a vision for the future, i.e. not reinventing the wheel, and that has been key to this project. I'd like to bring us back now to how the model on research culture has been developed in this case. The model has been developed to provide a nomenclature for the breadth of activities and understanding encompassed within the term research culture. It has been used to inform the search terms within the literature review and to structure the call for evidence. In the next stage of the project, it will be used to categorise examples of good practice, to improve research culture and environment, and subsequently identify any gaps. The Centre for Open Sciences Pyramid for Behaviour Change, shown here for your information, has been used as a structure for ideas generation. This describes the 5 levels of intervention for culture change, which include policy, make it required, incentives, make it rewarded, communities, make it normative, enabling environment/experience, make it easy, basic environment/infrastructure, make it possible. For the development of project outputs and outcomes, including the research culture model, we're taking an iterative approach to development. A draft model has been produced through reviewing a range of documents and reports relating to aspects of research culture, including but not limited to the Science Europe Values Framework, UK concordats and agreements, research culture statements and strategies from UK universities, evidence from the literature and desk review. The model of research culture is structured around how research is done, how it is valued and recognised, and how the research workforce is supported. The interconnectedness of research is such that inevitably there is some overlap within this model. Nevertheless, based on the feedback so far, it appears to incorporate the breadth of understanding of research culture and will provide a useful taxonomy to categorise examples related to practice. In terms of validation, the initial draft has been validated and continues to be refined through a series of interviews and correspondence with key stakeholders and networks representing a range of perspectives on research culture. The expectation is that it will be refined further through discussions within the co-creation workshops and the mapping of examples of good practice from the call for evidence, both of which activities will include more industry and third sector involvement. And that's where we've come to. So we have received almost 200 submissions to the call for evidence so far. And although it has now officially closed at the end of May, you are still able to submit a submission if you would like to. There is a link here, or you can email the team at Shift Learning. I think that's probably my time about up. I would like to talk some more about constant collaboration and effort. I had a great example of the Manchester City team, but unfortunately we've run out of time for that. So back to you, Dan.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks very much. Sorry, just trying to find the mute button. Thanks very much, Rachel. That was a really, really helpful overview. And yeah, shame we don't have time to talk about that, but I very much like to another time, so thank you. Great, so now I'm going to hand over to our final presentation. So Hayley, would you like to introduce your presentation? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks ever so much, Dan. Can everyone see that?
Yes, works for me, thank you.
Thank you. As much as I wanted to hear the Man City analogy, as an Arsenal fan, I'm probably glad we cut that short, Rachel. But yeah, so thank you ever so much to everyone for sticking around to the end of the day. And thanks to, obviously, Dan and Rachel before me as I take up the tail end of this session. So I'm Hayley Moulding. I'm a Senior Research Manager at the Higher Education Funding Council for Wales. I work for one of the 4 higher education funding bodies in the UK. So if you heard Kat Ball this morning doing part of the opening remarks, I'm the equivalent of who Kat works for, Scottish Funding Council, but specifically working on higher education and research in Wales. So you may have also heard HEFQ, the organisation I work for, mentioned as well this morning through my work that I'm doing with Karen Wall-Jorgensen as well at Cardiff around research, culture and environment and developing a broader network across Wales. So it's a privilege to be able to talk to you all today and kind of provide that kind of different perspective from a national kind of funding body around the work we're doing with concordats and what that future looks like. So, lovely. I wanted to just lay out kind of some of the groundwork of why HEFQ and myself, I suppose, are kind of so interested in research culture and particularly for today with regards to the concordats. So much like colleagues have already mentioned, HEFQ and I believe research cultures are ones that are secure, nurturing, inspiring, and prerequisites for research excellence and success in the broadest term, and the most holistic approach to excellence as well. As HEFQ, way before my time, we've been involved proactively in pushing and building the agenda of research culture prominence previously, and we've done that predominantly through engaging with the concordats and initiatives, whether that's being on the signatories group for the Research Integrity Concordat, but also on the strategy group of the Research Development Concordat as well, provision of funding support too, with the other kind of UK funding bodies to work with the UK. Obviously, we've seen the significance of landscape change and the progress through the Concordat frameworks. And as HEFQ, we recognise that through the development of our own action plan and how we can influence, encourage, support our institutions in Wales to recognise the importance of underpinning support through a real person, and I think, as Dan mentioned as well, a culture-centric approach too. So something to mention as well, actually, which Rachel reminded me of, is talking about the good practice exchange as well. And ourselves at HEFCU and also the other 3 UK funding bodies are engaged very closely with UKRI with regards to that development and ensuring that across the UK, that 4 UK nation approach is also taken and represented in that. So, slight delay in my clicks, sorry. So with that set out, when I think about the future and the future for concordance initiatives and how we are setting ourselves up in Wales, looking to what concordance initiatives are going to be like. So kind of looking at HEFCU ourselves and what we kind of outwardly promote who we are, looking at our corporate strategy, got our long-term ambitions, our vision and our purposes set out. And it's important probably to say now that HEFCU has one element of regulation. That's not me. My side is the influence, engagement, and the funding aspect of things with regards to higher education and research in Wales. So I'm thinking about those kind of terms in our vision of responsibility, sustainability, and that longer term benefit of the research environment and success of what that means in Wales for social, economic, environment, and cultural change as well. And we have kind of 3 approaches to how we can make changes across Wales. And that is through, as I mentioned, the regulation, the funding, and the influencing. So that's our kind of foundation, but more specifically for the research and innovation environment and sector in Wales, we have a vision for Wales. And this is something which is kind of reviewed annually and will be reviewed kind of more comprehensively next year as well. And as you may be able to see in the slightly unclear slide there, where we talk about kind of concordats and research culture, EDI, for example, is under that term excellence. So I see this probably as its kind of thematic home, kind of bear with me as I use random terms now, of under that pillar, but actually the concordats kind of operate across these 4 different areas under our epic anagram we have as HEFCU. So I see that as concordats operate across place. It's involved in driving civic benefit, cultural changes for individuals operating within institutions, as we've heard a lot about today, and that variety and diversity of professions operating in institutions. But also the fact that individuals and institutions live in the areas and communities of those institutions. So that culture is kind of pervasive across the institutional boundary and into that civic element too. We also see that concordats drive innovation through focusing on integration and inclusivity of bringing the diversity of institutions and organisations together. In Wales, our 8 universities and our Knightswood Open University is a diversity of different sizes and strengths and expertise. So we see that really prominently here. And also finally, collaboration. And as we know, as Dan's mentioned, through the Concordats and Agreement Review, the shared principles, shared set of values and indicators are highlighted. They can only be done at a real UK kind of cohesive and co-developed level as collaboration. So yes, I see there's nuances for institutions, but there's that collective engagement and sharing of values, it's conjoined activity of togetherness. That was a bit corny. Yeah. So at HEFCU, we're at a really pinnacle time to actually be thinking about the future. And this was really apt to think about the future of concordats and agreements, because we're kind of driving this agenda of collegiality and collaboration forward into a new organisation that we're becoming in April 2024. We're basically bringing together all of, not just me, sorry, Welsh Government and HEFCU are bringing together kind of the broader tertiary education sector with research in Wales. So in doing so, we have a number of strategic objectives which are set out in legislation, but they reflect kind of underpinning priorities for a functional, a healthy and successful tertiary education sector. So with bringing together those different strands of the educational lifespan, as CETA, we have that opportunity, Commission for Tertiary Education and Research, so CETA we're calling it, we have an opportunity to really have a golden thread of shared set of research culture values, which can permeate not just in higher education, and I think someone's question may have actually alluded to this as well with teaching, but also thinking outside of the research space to provide a broader framework and an indicating of underpinning excellence in institutions more generally, whether in further education, whether focusing on delivery of innovation, or as the learner societies and key stakeholders that we actually have as CETA as well. So those core principles and those being shared could really kind of fundamentally provide that bedrock more broadly. So I want to kind of think a little bit more broadly now about kind of future concordats in a broader sense, and kind of recognising and rewarding excellence across the research sector. So as HEFCU, we work with the other funding bodies I mentioned across the UK, and in consultation, of course, with possibly many of you here today, but also broadly in the sector and internationally, as part of the Future Research Assessment Programme. So that's FRAP. And that was done after kind of reviewing the REF that was back in 2021 to provide these kind of proposals of where we want to move forward in assessing research excellence. So it's known across the sector that the significant and much needed kind of shift of prominence of underpinning of research culture will be reflected kind of in the initial decisions for what that future research excellence framework is going to look like. We know there's a call for that, there's a need for that, and how that will develop is something that will soon to be found out. This obviously drives, influences, and impacts the future of how concordats operate. The future REF will hopefully look to harmonise and to recognise where burden can be simplified, and also to look and readdress and assess how excellence is being assessed and redefined through that lens of research culture, environment, and the perspective of individuals' experiences within, whether it's in their teams, in their units, but also their institutions as well. And we know as the four funding bodies, the Concordat and Agreements Review has been key to our discussions, and with that suggestion of shared principles and indicators that aid measurement and values, that's really kind of influenced our ongoing conversation of how research culture will be and should be assessed in any future kind of framework and exercise. So continuing kind of that theme of the Concordats and Agreements Review, I wanted to address kind of the number of different reviews which have been published over the last 5 years, whether it's in the Welsh sector, like we've had the Reid Review of Higher Education sector, and demonstrating the strength of Wales's diversity of institutions in the landscape, but also the much broader reviews, which I think have been spoken about today, whether that's nurse review and looking at review of funding, or of looking at kind of reducing and simplifying bureaucracy through the Tickell review. Now, we know that actually a lot of the outcomes, suggestions, and proposals from these reviews kind of moving forward, CAR actually underpins that and is kind of key in harmonising those different approaches and suggestions. So through that and looking forward to how those frameworks can be used to be able to find that most effective and collaborative way of really kind of revising, re-empowering the sector for the best way to create that healthy research culture environment. So, and finally from me as well, I always like to do this when I talk about talks and wonder a world if we didn't have funding. I wanted to kind of suggest, and I think someone mentioned it this morning actually, with regards to kind of specific research culture and environment funding. And currently in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, the institutions there, we don't have any dedicated kind of allocated funding for research culture environment projects. However, that doesn't mean that there won't be. It just means at the moment kind of alternative ways of being able to drive forward that agenda in a collaborative way, and collaborative in the genuine sense, not competition with a smile. We in Wales, we have the Wales Innovation Network, or WIN. We have our Learner Society of Wales, where they bring kind of that people-centric approach to things, and WIN brings that institutional-centric approach as well. We know that we start delivering networks, as Karen Wool-Jorgensen this morning mentioned. We've been driving and trying to push for developing a pan-Wales network, bringing together kind of environment and culture interested individuals and senior academics and professionals in each of the institutions. But the future also holds the use of these concordats that we have as frameworks for that change, not necessarily solutions, but driving and influencing that change and keeping people really at the center of what that change needs to be, and kind of molding those environments around those people from all those backgrounds and professions as well within that research space. And on that note, that is all from me. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Hayley. Really helpful to hear about the changing landscape, and particularly in a devolved context as well. So thank you very much for that. Excellent. Right. Well, we've got about 10 minutes for the Q&A discussion. I see there's been a few that have come in already and attempted to answer some of those. But just to recap, I mean, one was around action plan and delivery, and it's a really, really good question. I think something that's come through, as you say, is the co-ownership of some of this. But there was a recognition that there needs to be some kind of driver, convener to think about the next steps and how we might work together. There are some options for doing that, the Quora working group being one, but there may be others as well. So we are thinking about how we drive that forward as the next step. As I mentioned in the presentation, it's really important that we continue the momentum around this, that we don't just publish the report and leave it there. So we do want to try and convene initiative owners again as soon as we can to think about how we can, well, how much progress has been made already, but also more that we can do to drive things forward as well. There was a question about the number of concordats each institution is signed up to and resource estimations. Yes, the phase 1 report did unpack some of that. There was a survey that was done with higher education institutions where it explores some of those areas as well. So there is a bit more detail. Apologies, I don't have the stats to hand, but there are some that can be unpacked within the report and within the annex as well. We do have a question that's still in there as well, and Hayley and Rachel too. I don't know if you wanted to sort of elaborate on some of this as well, because Hayley, you touched on this a bit, but about the focus on research culture and environment to support teaching challenges as well. It's an interesting question. There's lots of challenges that we have in this space at the moment. There's something that we might want to think about. So I don't know, Hayley, if maybe you wanted to kind of building on what you said, think about how you see the strategic approach developing in terms of concordats and agreements, research culture more broadly, for the new organisation that's coming in, the Commission for Tertiary Education and Research, but also how some of those challenges align to the teaching side of things as well.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Dan. Yeah, it's a really good question, particularly as I think so many of the things that we've seen the concordats and agreements review, but more broadly in the sector, are fundamental kind of underpinning values or practices or principles which kind of embody best practice, good practice, promising practice in any kind of environment. But I think because operating in the research sector, there's been such a kind of, there are nuanced environments. There has been this kind of, I suppose in the past and not so much focus on postgraduate research, for example, where is kind of the investment and focus has been on undergraduate research, where probably that kind of trajectory of seeing where it would relate to teaching would be more prominent. I think there's been so many challenges and nuanced challenges of understanding postgraduate researchers, the professionals, the technical professionals that are supporting researchers, that focus has had to be there for kind of a legitimate reason to really drive that first. But that's not saying that all of that learning and that development can't kind of transcend those boundaries into different things. I'm not an expert on the teaching kind of frameworks, but I think a lot of things which hopefully will come through looking towards REF as well. Can you reflect that into looking at TEF, for example? That's not an answer. That's a question more broadly. I don't know. There might be kind of those shifts, those focuses, and research culture environment being key to it might be something that could be accommodated. And particularly for us as CETA going forward, because we're bringing in together further education, teaching and innovation, as well as higher education, teaching and innovation, we want obviously that collaboration, that joint up thinking more broadly as our kind of 8 strategic priorities going forward as CETA. But in doing that, you don't want to lose the nuances of those particular experiences as well. So I think it's a really, really fine line to ensure that you are kind of focusing on those really specific things that are occurring in particular environments, but you don't lose that kind of connectiveness that can be learned and shared across the piece as well.
Absolutely. Very, very helpful. Rachel, as well, I don't know if you wanted to unpack a bit on where you see Vitai's role in the future of research culture and where it kind of operates within that as well, if you could say a few words.
Sure. So, I mean, our role is very heavily in the, how do we support researchers? What is it that they will need in the future as the individuals in the process? And I think actually, I was just thinking about the teaching question. You know, if we exist within an environment that is porous, as research and teaching is, you know, most researchers are on research and teaching contracts, or they're on, it doesn't matter what their contract says, they probably do both. And so if we foster that kind of collaborative and supportive environment for researchers, that's going to spill out into other areas of, you know, higher education institutions. And if we also put emphasis and structures in place that support professional and career development, that is going to help everybody. It will create space in the system, and it will create a kind of a set behaviours of what is expected in terms of collegiality, what is expected in terms of line management or supervisory if we're talking at the PGR level. And I think those things take time. But we've made quite a lot of changes in the last 5 years. If you look across the sector, we're moving in the right direction. And, you know, as Vitae, we want to play our role in ensuring that, you know, the support of researchers is kept right in the centre of things.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Okay, I think we're nearly at time now, and I think we've covered off all the questions. So I think maybe we should draw it to a close there then. So thank you very much, Rachel and Hayley, for your presentations today. And thanks very much to all of you for joining us for this session and all the previous sessions across the day as well. That brings us to the end of the first day of the Research Culture and Practice Forum. I hope you'll join us again tomorrow. We'll be discussing how we can support research integrity, how we can support sustainable research and technical careers, researcher career pathways, and also how knowledge exchange contributes towards a positive culture. So lots of things being discussed tomorrow too. In the meantime, have a good afternoon, everyone, and hopefully see you tomorrow. Take care. Thank you.